Captain Daniel Wright stood in the control room of the ESS Horizon and looked at the strange message on his screen. The words made no sense at first. Someone from space had sent Earth a letter, but it was not the kind of letter anyone expected. For 50 years, humans had been listening to the stars and waiting for aliens to say hello. They had imagined wars or peace treaties or amazing technology trades. Nobody imagined this. The message was from something called the Gnocchi Collective. It read like a tax form. They wanted Earth to send them reports about farms and crops and animals. They wanted numbers for wheat and corn and cattle. They wanted this information for the next 200 years. The letter said Earth was in their territory now. It said Earth was in Sector 42 of their administrative zone. It said humans needed to follow the rules and send paperwork on time. Lieutenant Maria Santos sat at her station and read the message again. She could not believe what she was seeing. Aliens had finally contacted Earth and they were asking for farm reports. It was like the universe was playing a joke on everyone. She looked at Commander Paul Griffin, who was shaking his head slowly. His face showed the same confusion everyone felt. The strangest part of the message was a phrase that kept repeating. The aliens wrote, and there are 2 and 4 several times. Nobody knew what it meant. The translation team had worked for hours trying to figure it out. Some people thought it was a code. Others thought it might be coordinates. Maria thought it might just be how the aliens counted things. Maybe they saw 2 human colonies in space and 4 big farming areas on Earth. Maybe that was all Earth meant to them, just numbers in a file. Daniel called his crew together in the meeting room. Kevin Moore came from communications. He was young and looked worried. Lieutenant Amy Brooks arrived from the science station. She brought her tablet with more analysis of the alien message. Everyone sat down and waited for Daniel to speak. He started by telling them what they already knew. The message had been sent to Earth and to every human base in the solar system. The moon colony got it. The Mars station got it. Even the small research post near Jupiter received the same demand. The Gnocchi wanted everyone to know they were in charge now. They expected humans to obey without question. Paul pulled up a map on the big screen. It showed where the message came from based on the signal. The Gnocchi were far away, but not as far as anyone hoped. Their space was big and it touched the edges of human territory. If they really believed Earth belonged to them, then there might be trouble soon. Kevin shared news from Earth Command. Every government on the planet was meeting right now. Presidents and prime ministers and generals were all trying to decide what to do. Should humans send the farm reports and hope for peace? Should they refuse and risk making the aliens angry? Should they try to talk and explain that Earth was not some small farm waiting to be managed? Nobody had good answers yet. Maria asked the question everyone was thinking. What if the Gnocchi had big weapons and powerful ships? What if saying no meant war? Humans had ships, but they were made for exploring and research. Only a few were built for fighting. Earth might not be ready for a real battle in space. Amy had studied the message signal carefully. She said something interesting. The Gnocchi technology was old, very old. It worked well, but it had not changed in a long time. Their message came through systems that were maybe thousands of years old. That meant they had been in space for a very long time. It also meant they might not be good at dealing with new situations. They probably expected everyone to just follow their rules because that was how things had always worked. Daniel listened to all of this and made a decision. He told his crew they were going back to Earth. Command would want all the deep spaceships close to home. Whatever happened next would happen soon. The Gnocchi would want an answer and Earth needed to be ready to give one. The horizon turned and started moving toward the blue planet far away. Daniel sat in his chair and thought about what came next. Humans had spent so long dreaming about meeting aliens. They had built radio telescopes and sent messages into space. They had made plans for every situation they could imagine. But nobody planned for this. Nobody thought aliens would show up with clipboards and demand reports. He read the ending of the Gnocchi message one more time. It said, "Compliance expected and resistance is administratively inconvenient." Those words told Daniel everything he needed to know about these aliens. They did not see Earth as a world full of people with their own dreams and rights. They saw it as a problem that needed to be filed correctly. They thought humans would just do what they were told, because it was easier than arguing. Daniel smiled a little bit. Humans were very good at being inconvenient. All through history, people had said no to kings and empires and rules that did not make sense. Earth had fought wars over the right to choose its own path. Men and women had died defending the idea that nobody should tell them how to live. Now some aliens from far away thought they could just claim Earth with a letter. They thought humans would see the paperwork and give up. The gnocchi had made a big mistake. They picked the wrong planet to push around. They sent their message to a world that had learned long ago how to stand up and fight back. Earth might not have the biggest guns or the oldest technology, but it had something more important. It had people who would not quit. It had billions of humans who would rather take a risk than live on their knees. As the Horizon flew through space toward home, Daniel knew what would happen next. Earth would read that message and laugh. Then Earth would write back. The answer would be short and clear, no. That one word would change everything. The gnocchi would learn that humans did not fit in their files. They would discover that some species could not be managed or controlled or ordered around. The ship moved faster now and the crew worked quietly at their stations. Everyone knew they were heading into something big. First contact was supposed to be humanity's greatest moment. Instead, it had become something strange and almost funny. Aliens were real and they wanted farm reports. Earth was going to tell them no, and then everything would get very interesting very fast. The big meeting room in Geneva was full of people from every country on Earth. President Helen Foster walked to the front and everyone got quiet. She had called this emergency meeting as soon as the alien message arrived. Now representatives from 200 nations sat waiting to hear what she would say. The Moon Colony sent Ambassador Sophie Turner. Mars sent Carlos Rivera. Even the small stations in the asteroid belt sent observers. This decision would affect every human alive. Helen started by showing the message again on the giant screens around the room. Everyone had read it already, but seeing it displayed so large made it feel more real. The gnocchi collective wanted Earth to report to them like Earth was just another farm in their empire. They used words like compliance and administrative zone and proper procedure. They talked about Earth the way someone might talk about a warehouse that needed better organization. General Lucas Perry stood up next. He was in charge of Earth Defense Forces, and everyone wanted to know if humans could fight if they had to. He brought up images of space on the big screen. These pictures showed what spy satellites had found. The gnocchi had big territory out in the stars. They controlled hundreds of planets. Their ships moved on regular routes like buses following a schedule. Everything about them seemed organized and planned. But Lucas pointed out something important. In all the pictures and all the data, there were no warships. The gnocchi had cargo ships and what looked like office buildings that could fly through space. They had communication stations and supply depots. They did not have battleships or fighters or weapons platforms. Either they were hiding their military or they had never needed one. Sophie Turner asked the obvious question. Why would they not need weapons? Lucas explained his theory. The gnocchi had been running their empire for thousands of years. In all that time, nobody had ever said no to them. Every planet they found just accepted the rules and started sending reports. They probably thought fighting was something primitive species did before they learned about proper administration. They might not even understand the idea of rebellion. Carlos from Mars had a different concern. He wanted to know about the phrase 2 and 4. The science teams had been working on it constantly. Dr. Lisa Campbell stood up to explain what they had figured out. The gnocchi had done a survey of human space. They saw Luna and Mars as the two settlements. They counted North America and South America and Europe and Asia as 4 big farm zones. They completely missed all the cities and the billions of people. Their survey was so basic it was almost useless. Director Frank Hayes got angry when he heard this. He ran the Agricultural Commission and the idea of being reduced to just a farm made him furious. He said Earth was not some simple colony growing food. Humans had built amazing cities and invented incredible technology. They had art and music and philosophy. They had cured diseases and split atoms and walked on the moon. Being called a farm was insulting. Helen let people talk for a while. Everyone needed to express their feelings about the situation. Some ambassadors were scared. They worried the gnocchi might have secret weapons. They thought refusing might bring destruction to Earth. Other representatives were angry like Frank. They said humans had not fought for freedom all through history, just to give it up to aliens with clipboards. After an hour of discussion, Helen called for quiet again. She said the choice was simple, even if it was hard. Earth could comply and accept being part of the gnocchi empire. That would mean giving up independence. It would mean human children growing up as subjects instead of free citizens. Future generations would live under alien rules and alien control. They would have to ask permission for everything they wanted to do, or Earth could refuse. Saying no meant risk. It meant standing up to an empire that had never been challenged before. Nobody knew what would happen. The gnocchi might bring weapons humans had not seen yet. They might cut Earth off from the rest of space. They might do nothing at all. The uncertainty was frightening. Admiral Richard Stone said something that changed the mood in the room. He reminded everyone that humanity had always faced uncertainty. When the first explorers sailed across oceans, they did not know what they would find. When the first astronauts went to the moon, they took huge risks. Every great achievement in human history came from people who were willing to face the unknown. Fear was natural, but it could not be the only thing driving the decision. Helen called for a vote. Each nation and colony would decide together. The question was simple. Should Earth send the compliance reports and accept gnocchi authority? Or should Earth refuse and declare its independence? She reminded everyone that this vote would define humanity's place in the universe for generations to come. The voting took 20 minutes. Representatives pressed buttons at their seats. The results appeared on the big screen. Out of 212 voters, only 8 chose compliance. Everyone else voted to refuse. Earth would tell the gnocchi no. The room erupted in noise. Some people cheered. Others looked worried. A few cried because the decision was so big. Helen waited for quiet and then explained what would happen next. Earth would send a message back to the gnocchi. It would be polite but firm. Humans would explain that they were a free species with their own government. They would offer friendship and trade but not obedience. At the same time, Earth Defense Forces would mobilize. Every ship would return to the solar system. New weapons would be moved into position around Earth and the colonies. Humans would prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. If the gnocchi tried to force compliance, they would find humans ready to fight. Sophie asked what they should say in the message. How do you tell an ancient empire that you will not follow their rules? Helen had already written a draft. She read it out loud. The message thanked the gnocchi for making contact. It explained that Earth was humanity's homeworld. It said humans had never been part of any empire and would not start now. It offered to establish diplomatic relations based on respect and equality. The message ended with a simple statement. Earth wished for peace but was prepared to defend its freedom. That line made everyone realize how serious this was. Humanity was drawing a line in space and daring the gnocchi to cross it. Carlos suggested adding information about human culture. Maybe if the gnocchi understood more about people, they would see Earth differently. Lisa agreed. She proposed including data about human history and achievements. Show them that Earth was not a simple farm, but a complex civilization worthy of respect. The additions were made and the final message was approved. Lieutenant Commander Amy Brooks would send it from Earth Command in 3 hours. That gave everyone time to prepare. News was already spreading across Earth. People were gathering in streets and watching screens. Everyone wanted to know what the aliens had said and what Earth would do. Helen ended the meeting with a short speech. She said humanity had reached a turning point. For the first time ever, humans were not alone in the universe. But first contact had not brought the peace and friendship everyone hoped for. Instead, it brought a challenge. The gnocchi assumed humans would obey. Earth was about to prove them wrong. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it together as one species united in the right to choose its own destiny. As representatives left the meeting room, they knew the easy part was over. Voting to refuse was simple. Living with that choice would be harder. The message would reach the gnocchi in a few days. Then Earth would learn if ancient bureaucrats could accept being told no, or if they would respond with anger. The wait would be difficult, but there was no going back now. Amy Brooks sat at the communication station in Earth Command headquarters deep underground. Her hands moved across the controls, checking everything one more time. The message to the gnocchi was ready to send. President Helen Foster stood behind her watching. General Lucas Perry was there too, along with a dozen other important people. Everyone wanted to see this moment when Earth told an alien empire no. The message had been written carefully. It was respectful but clear. Earth acknowledged receiving the gnocchi transmission but declined their request. Humans explained they were a sovereign species. They controlled their own world and made their own choices. The message offered friendship and cooperation but not submission. It said Earth wanted peaceful relations with all species but would never accept external rule. Amy had attached files to the message. One file contained human history going back thousands of years. It showed how people had built civilizations and fought for freedom. Another file had information about art and music and literature. There were pictures of Earth showing beautiful cities and natural wonders. The goal was to make the gnocchi understand that humans were not some primitive farm colony. They were a complex culture with rights and dignity. Helen gave the order. Amy pressed the button. The message launched into space, traveling at light speed toward gnocchi territory. It would take 3 days to reach them. Then however long they needed to read it and decide how to respond, Earth would wait and prepare. The waiting was the hardest part. Daniel Wright and the crew of the Horizon had returned to Earth orbit. They joined 50 other ships, forming a defensive line around the planet. More vessels protected Luna and Mars. Every space station went on high alert. Humans who lived in space moved supplies and checked emergency systems. Nobody knew what would happen, but everyone got ready for trouble. Daniel spent time studying everything humans knew about the gnocchi. It was not much. The aliens had sent only 2 messages. Their ships appeared in some old telescope photos, but always far away. Nobody had ever seen a gnocchi in person. The only clue about their nature came from their words. They talked like bureaucrats. Everything was procedures and regulations and proper filing. Maria Santos had an interesting theory. She thought the gnocchi might not understand conflict at all. Their empire was so old and so established that they probably had not faced resistance in centuries. Every planet they contacted just accepted the rules. It was easier than fighting. So the gnocchi administrative system kept growing. Nobody ever challenged them. They might have forgotten how to deal with species that had their own ideas. Paul Griffin worried about something else. What if the gnocchi did have weapons but had never needed to use them? Hidden away somewhere might be ancient warships waiting for emergencies. Earth's refusal could trigger a response humans were not ready for. It was possible the gnocchi seemed peaceful only because everyone obeyed them. Kevin Moore monitored all the frequencies constantly. He was listening for any new messages from the aliens. He also tracked human communications. News of Earth's response had spread everywhere. Most people supported the decision to refuse. They felt proud that humanity stood up for itself. A few people were scared and thought compliance would be safer, but even those who disagreed respected that Earth had voted together. The 3 days passed slowly. Daniel tried to keep his crew calm by running drills and checking systems. Other captains did the same. The defensive fleet needed to be ready. If gnocchi ships appeared, humans had to respond quickly. Plans were made for different scenarios. If the aliens came with weapons, Earth would fight. If they came to talk, humans would listen. If they did nothing at all, then Earth would have won by default. On the 4th day, the response arrived. Kevin saw it first on his screens. He called Daniel immediately. The message was longer than the first one, and the tone was different. The gnocchi sounded confused and slightly annoyed. They said Earth's refusal had been forwarded to a higher authority for review. A subsector administrator was looking at the situation. The message warned that not complying would bring administrative penalties. The penalties listed were strange. Trade restrictions, even though Earth did not trade with the gnocchi. Resource quotas, even though Earth controlled its own resources. Mandatory inspections and compliance teams. The aliens were threatening humans with bureaucracy. They talked about forms and reviews and official procedures. It was almost funny, except it was also serious. The gnocchi really believed paperwork was a weapon. The message had more information about the 2 and 4 designation. The gnocchi had done a new survey. They admitted their first scan was incomplete. Now they detected multiple settlements and 6 agricultural zones instead of 4. They said a full planetary audit was required. Compliance teams would arrive in 37 days to begin inspections. Daniel read the message to his crew. Everyone had the same reaction. The gnocchi were actually sending auditors. They planned to show up with their forms and clipboards and inspect Earth like it was a warehouse. They still did not understand that humans would not allow it. The aliens were so locked into their procedures they could not imagine any other way. Helen called another meeting with world leaders. Everyone agreed the situation was absurd but also dangerous. The gnocchi might seem silly with their obsession with paperwork, but they controlled hundreds of planets. That kind of power came from somewhere. Either everyone complied willingly, or the gnocchi had ways of forcing compliance. Earth needed to be ready for both possibilities. Admiral Richard Stone proposed a plan. When the compliance teams arrived, Earth should meet them with an impressive show of force. Not to attack, but to demonstrate strength. Line up the entire defense fleet. Have military ships from every nation visible. Make it clear that Earth was unified and capable. Maybe seeing human power would make the gnocchi reconsider their approach. Sophie Turner had another idea. Prepare a presentation for the auditors. If they wanted to inspect Earth, then let them see everything. Show them the cities and the technology and the billions of people. Walk them through human history and culture. Make them understand that Earth was not what they thought. Maybe education would work better than threats. Both plans were approved. Earth would prepare for the arrival in 37 days. Ships would gather in orbit, creating an impressive formation. At the same time, diplomats would prepare information packages. If the gnocchi were willing to learn, humans would teach them. If they tried to enforce their rules by force, humans would resist. Daniel volunteered the Horizon to be part of the greeting party. His ship would be among the first to meet the auditors. It was an honor, but also a risk. Nobody knew how the gnocchi would react to being told no in person. They might be reasonable or they might be dangerous. Either way, someone had to face them first. The days passed quickly as preparations continued. Engineers upgraded weapon systems. Diplomats practiced presentations. Scientists analyzed every bit of data about gnocchi technology. Earth's internet exploded with discussions. Everyone had opinions about what should happen. Some people made jokes about alien auditors. Others worried this was the beginning of an invasion. Most people just waited to see what would come. Helen gave an address to the world 1 week before the gnocchi arrival. She spoke calmly about the situation. Earth had made its choice and would stand by it. Humans offered friendship but demanded respect. The coming days would test whether the galaxy had room for a species that refused to bow down. She reminded everyone that humanity's greatest strength had always been the ability to face the unknown with courage. Daniel watched the speech from the Horizon's mess hall. His crew gathered around the screen listening. When Helen finished talking, Maria turned to Daniel and asked if he thought this would work. Could Earth really stand up to an empire that had existed for thousands of years? Could humans protect their freedom against aliens who controlled so much space? Daniel thought about it carefully before answering. He said nobody knew what would happen. The gnocchi might accept Earth's independence. They might try to punish humanity. They might do something completely unexpected. But whatever came next, humans would face it on their own terms. That was worth any risk. Around Earth, the defense fleet continued growing. More ships arrived every day. The planet started to look like a fortress surrounded by metal and weapons. It was the largest gathering of human military power in history. If the gnocchi wanted Earth, they would have to take it by force, and that would not be easy. The countdown continued. 37 days became 30, then 20, then 10. Earth held its breath, waiting for the aliens to arrive. The gnocchi ship appeared exactly on time. It came out of faster than light travel at the edge of the solar system, right on schedule. Daniel Wright saw it first on the Horizon's long-range sensors. The vessel was enormous. It looked like a giant gray box floating in space. There were rows and rows of windows, making it look more like an office building than a starship. No weapons were visible anywhere on the hull. Just docking ports and antenna arrays and what might have been cargo bays. The ESS Horizon moved to intercept along with 19 other Earth vessels. The fleet spread out in a deliberate formation. Warships mixed with civilian craft, showing the unity of humanity. Everyone wanted the gnocchi to see that Earth took this seriously. This was not some disorganized colony. This was a coordinated defense by an entire species. Kevin Moore opened communication channels. The alien ship responded immediately. The screen activated and humans got their first look at the gnocchi. The being on the screen was strange but not frightening. It had pale blue skin that looked almost translucent. 3 eyes were arranged in a triangle pattern on its long face. The alien wore formal robes covered in patches and symbols. It looked like someone dressed for an important office meeting. The gnocchi spoke and the translation computer turned its words into English. The voice was flat and precise. It said its name was Assessor Prime Zektol of the gnocchi Administrative Collective. It was here to conduct the required planetary audit of Administrative. Zone 42, Subsection Earth. It requested immediate clearance to proceed to the primary human settlement. Daniel kept his face neutral as he responded. He introduced himself as Captain Daniel Wright of the Earthship Horizon. He welcomed Zektol to the solar system. Then he delivered the message Earth had prepared. Humans did not recognize gnocchi authority. There would be no audit. Earth governed itself and made its own rules. Zektol's three eyes blinked one after another. The translation program noted this might indicate confusion. The alien said something about how the human statement contradicted proper administrative protocol. It explained that all settlements within surveyed space fell under collective jurisdiction. This had been standard procedure for over 2,000 years. The gnocchi way was the only way things had ever worked. Daniel explained carefully that Earth was not a settlement in the way the gnocchi understood. Humans were not some small colony waiting to be managed. Earth was the homeworld of humanity. 12 billion people lived on the planet. Another billion lived on Luna and Mars and stations throughout the system. Humans had their own government and their own civilization. They did not need or want external administration. There was a long silence. Zektol seemed to be checking something off screen. When the alien looked back, all three eyes focused intensely on Daniel. It said the population numbers were impossible for an unadministered zone. 12 billion could not be correct. The surveys showed only a developing agricultural world with limited settlements. Maria confirmed the numbers. 13 billion humans total across the solar system. Thousands of cities, millions of smaller towns. Agriculture was important, but it was just one part of the economy. Humans had industry and technology and culture. The gnocchi surveys had completely missed the reality of Earth. Zektol made a gesture that might have been frustration. It said the situation was highly irregular. The designation 2 and 4 was supposed to be accurate. 2 colonies and 4 farm zones. That was what the report said. But if humans were telling the truth, then everything was wrong. The alien said this matter exceeded its authority. It would need to contact the regional administrator. Daniel saw an opportunity. He offered to host Zektol and the assessment team on the horizon. Humans could show the gnocchi more about their civilization. Maybe if the aliens understood Earth better, they could discuss a proper relationship. Not ruler and subject, but 2 species working together. Zektol hesitated. It said hosting was not standard procedure, but given the irregularities, the alien agreed. It would bring senior staff to the human ship. This was a huge step. First contact was happening face-to-face instead of through messages. 3 hours later, the gnocchi team beamed aboard. There were 6 of them, including Zektol. They moved stiffly like they were uncomfortable with the informal atmosphere of a human vessel. Crew members nodded greetings as the aliens passed. The gnocchi seemed startled by these casual interactions. Everything about them suggested they were used to rigid formal structures. Daniel met them in the observation lounge. He had chosen this room specifically because it had a large window showing Earth. When the gnocchi entered, they all stopped. All 18 eyes stared at the blue and white planet floating in space. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Zektol finally asked if that was the human homeworld. Daniel confirmed it was Earth. He explained that humans had evolved there over millions of years. Everything about humanity came from that one planet. The land and the oceans and the air had shaped human bodies and minds. Cities covered the continents. Billions of people lived their lives down there. It was not just a planet. It was home. One of the other gnocchi spoke up. This one was introduced as Junior Assessor Malvin. It made a comment about how Earth's ocean coverage was only 71%. Standard administrative planets should allocate 85% water for optimal resource management. The alien seemed bothered that Earth did not meet some bureaucratic ideal. Daniel explained patiently that humans did not design Earth. They found themselves on it and learned to adapt. The planet was what it was. Humans worked with what nature provided rather than trying to force everything into administrative categories. Zektol turned from the window. The alien said it had contacted Regional Administrator Kep Sil. She was reviewing the situation now, but the assessor warned Daniel that the collective did not simply allow worlds to opt out of the administrative structure. There were procedures and protocols for everything. Nothing happened without proper forms and approvals. Daniel met the alien's three-eyed gaze steadily. He said humans understood bureaucracy. They had their own procedures and protocols. But humanity also believed in self-determination. That meant having the right to choose their own path. Earth was willing to establish diplomatic relations with the gnocchi. Humans would consider trade agreements and cultural exchanges, but they would never subordinate themselves to external administration. Zektol asked what humans would do if the alternative was isolation. The gnocchi controlled trade routes and communication networks across huge areas of space. If Earth refused to join the collective, it might be cut off from the galactic community. Did humans really want to be alone? Daniel thought about the question. He said humanity had spent thousands of years thinking they were alone in the universe. They had looked at the stars and wondered if anyone else was out there. When they finally reached space, they found it empty. So humans learned to be self-sufficient. They could handle isolation if necessary. But Daniel did not think it would come to that. He explained his reasoning. The collective would eventually realize that having Earth as a partner was more valuable than having humans as an unwilling administrative zone. Humans had things to offer, technology that developed differently from gnocchi technology, ideas and creativity that came from a different way of thinking. Trade and cooperation would benefit both species more than conflict. Zektul was quiet for a long moment. Finally, the alien said something interesting. Humans were very confident for such a young species. Most races the gnocchi encountered were intimidated by the size and age of the collective. They accepted administration because they thought they had no choice. But humans seemed unafraid. Daniel admitted that humans were confident, not because they thought they were better than anyone else, but because they knew what they were willing to fight for. Throughout history, people had stood up against empires and tyrants. They had died defending the right to choose their own destiny. That was not going to change just because the empire this time came from the stars. Paul brought up data on a display screen. He showed the gnocchi information about human history. Wars fought for independence, revolutions against unjust rulers, movements to establish rights and freedoms. The pattern was clear. Humans resisted control. It was built into their nature. Any attempt to administer Earth by force would face resistance that might last generations. Maria added that humans also valued cooperation when it was based on respect. The solar system had hundreds of different cultures and governments. They had learned to work together despite differences. Earth could do the same with alien species, but only if the relationship was between equals, not master and servant. Zektul and the other gnocchi absorbed all this information. They asked questions about human technology and society. They seemed genuinely curious, even if they were also concerned. The visit lasted several hours. By the end, the aliens looked thoughtful rather than simply confused. As the gnocchi prepared to return to their ship, Zektul said something that gave Daniel hope. The alien admitted this situation was unique in its experience. The assessor had worked for the collective for many cycles. It had processed hundreds of worlds. Every single one had accepted administration without question. Earth was the first to refuse. That made humans either very foolish or very brave. Zektul was not sure which yet. Daniel watched Regional Administrator Kepsil arrive 2 weeks after the first meeting. Her ship was even larger than the audit vessel. It looked like a flying city made of metal and glass. The vessel carried thousands of gnocchi and enough supplies to support them for years. This was not just an inspection team. This was the heart of the collective's regional government coming to deal with Earth personally. The meeting was held on a neutral station. Human engineers had built it quickly in Earth orbit specifically for these negotiations. The structure was simple but functional. A large conference room sat in the center with docking ports for both human and gnocchi ships. Windows showed Earth below, reminding everyone what this discussion was really about. President Helen Foster led the human delegation. She brought ambassadors and generals and scientists. Admiral Richard Stone stood beside her, representing Earth's military. Sophie Turner came from Luna and Carlos Rivera from Mars. The colonies wanted their voices heard too. General Lucas Perry was there with detailed intelligence about gnocchi capabilities. Dr. Lisa Campbell had prepared presentations about human civilization in case they were needed. Across the wide conference table sat Kepsil and her administrative staff. The regional administrator was impressive and intimidating. She had 4 arms instead of 3 like most gnocchi. Her skin was darker blue, suggesting age or status. Robes covered in complex symbols draped her tall frame. Everything about Kepsil communicated authority and experience. The administrator began speaking before anyone else could. Her voice carried weight and certainty. She said the collective had never encountered a situation like this in over 2,000 years. Earth claimed sovereignty over a world the gnocchi had catalogued as an emerging zone. Humans refused audit and inspection. They displayed military capability and unity. They had populated multiple worlds. None of this matched the original survey data. Helen responded calmly. Everything Kepsil said was accurate. Earth did claim sovereignty because it was humanity's homeworld. Humans did refuse audit because they governed themselves. The military capability was real because people had the right to defend what was theirs. The population spread across the solar system because humans were a spacefaring civilization. Kepsil folded her forearms in what translators suggested was a judgmental posture. She said the problem was that Earth existed within mapped space. The collective had maintained order in this region for thousands of years. If Earth's independence was simply accepted, it would set a dangerous precedent. Other worlds might start questioning their administrative status. The system that had worked for so long could begin to break down. Sophie leaned forward and said something bold. Maybe other worlds should question their status. If they were sentient beings with their own civilizations, why should they not have self-determination? Perhaps the collective needed to change rather than forcing everyone to fit old patterns. The administrator's skin darkened, showing agitation. She said the collective provided structure and order. Resources were distributed fairly. Conflicts between worlds were resolved peacefully. Without administration, chaos would result. Systems would fight each other. Species would compete destructively. The galaxy needed the stability only the collective could provide. Lucas challenged that assumption. He said humans had only one solar system, but they had learned to cooperate without external control. Nations on Earth had their own governments. The colonies had independence, yet they all worked together when needed. People traded and communicated and resolved disputes. Structure could exist without empire. Kepsil pointed out that humanity controlled only one system. She asked what would happen when humans encountered other species with competing interests. Conflicts over resources or territory would arise. Without administrative oversight to mediate those conflicts, war would become inevitable. Humans would eventually beg for the kind of management the collective provided. Helen saw an opening in the conversation. She said the administrator was approaching this incorrectly. Humanity did not want to destroy the collective or convince them to abandon their methods. Humans simply wanted recognition of their right to self-governance. In exchange, Earth offered something the collective had never had before. A true ally rather than a subject. Kepsil asked Helen to explain. The president took her time laying out the proposal. The collective administered and maintained. They cataloged and distributed and regulated. But from what humans had observed, the gnocchi did not innovate. Their technology was stable but unchanged for centuries. They had perfected efficiency, but stopped pushing boundaries. Growth had been sacrificed for stability. Helen continued. Humanity was different. Humans innovated constantly. Sometimes innovations failed spectacularly. Other times they led to breakthroughs that changed everything. Human technology had advanced more in 200 years than gnocchi technology had in 2000. Not because humans were smarter, but because they took risks. Earth could share that innovative spirit with the collective. New technologies, new ideas, new approaches to old problems, not as subjects reporting to administrators but as partners working together. The administrator was silent for a long time. Her forearms unfolded slowly. When she spoke again, her tone was different, less certain and more curious. She asked what humanity wanted in return for this partnership. Helen listed the terms. Recognition of Earth as an independent sovereign state. No audits or inspections without invitation. Freedom to expand into unclaimed systems. Access to collective trade routes and communication networks. Cultural exchange programs. A formal treaty establishing mutual respect and cooperation. Kepsil considered the proposal. She said it would require approval from the High Administrative Council. Such a dramatic change to collective policy could not be decided by one administrator, no matter how senior. But there was another issue to address first. The regional administrator brought up the phrase 2 and 4. She explained it had become a significant problem within collective bureaucracy. When Assessor Zektal reported the actual scale of human civilization, it caused massive disruption. Records had to be corrected across multiple systems. The surveyor responsible for the original assessment was under investigation. Internal reports were being filed. Entire departments were reviewing procedures. The phrase 2 and 4 had become shorthand in administrative circles. It meant a catastrophic failure of assessment, a situation where the data was so wrong that everything built on it became meaningless. Some gnocchi were angry about the error. Others found it darkly amusing. But everyone agreed it could never happen again. Carlos tried to hide a smile. The idea that first contact between humanity and an alien empire resulted from a filing error was absurd. But it was also very human. Big moments in history often came from small mistakes. Earth had been discovered by accident. Great inventions happened because of failed experiments. Now humanity's place in the galaxy was being determined because some alien bureaucrat miscounted farms. Kepsil stood to her full impressive height. She said she could not make the final decision about Earth's status. That power belonged to the High Administrative Council. But she would recommend accepting humanity's proposal. Not because the collective needed Earth, but because trying to administer humans would be inefficient. She explained her reasoning. After reviewing human history and observing human behavior, she had concluded that humanity was contentious and difficult. Humans argued constantly, even among themselves. Getting them to follow collective regulations would consume enormous administrative resources. It would tie up assessors and compliance teams for decades. The cost would far exceed any benefit. Sophie whispered to Helen, asking if that was meant as a compliment. Kepsil answered before Helen could respond. The administrator's hearing was apparently quite good. She said it was pragmatic assessment, not judgment. The collective valued efficiency above all else. Fighting humanity, even a bureaucratic fight, would be wasteful. Accepting Earth as a partner and observing the results might yield valuable information. Helen stood to face the administrator directly. She asked when the High Council would make their decision. Kepsil said the council met in 6 Earth months. She would present the case for creating a new classification. Independent partner species. Earth would be the first world with this status. During the waiting period, all administrative actions regarding humanity would be suspended. No audits, no regulations, no enforcement. In return, Earth would agree to host a gnocchi embassy. Observers would live among humans and report on their development. They would assess whether partnership was working. If the experiment succeeded, it might change how the collective dealt with other strong-willed species. If it failed, the question of administration would be revisited. Helen extended her hand in a gesture of agreement. Kepsil looked at the offered hand curiously. After a moment, the administrator reached out with one of her forearms and grasped it. The grip was firm and surprisingly warm. Both leaders held the handshake while translators captured images. This moment would be remembered. The day humanity and an alien empire chose cooperation over conflict. The meeting ended with both sides feeling cautiously optimistic.